Okay, I know it's a long project and we are getting closer to implementing the main part of it, which is autocomplete component. So this is autocomplete.jsx. I'm using CommonJS and Node.js notation to import modules because I'm using Browserify with gulp. Okay, so React and React DOM, they're essential. Request, I'm using that to make HTTP requests. You can use super agent, you can use anything else you want. That's just HTTP agent library. And reflux, it's a data flow library, which is a little bit friendlier and easier than flow. And again, if T is just a shortcut. Var actions, that's how we define actions in reflux. So we use reflux.createActions. One of them would be load options. Another would be add option. So load option is when we're getting number of rooms and the list of rooms. Add options, it's when we're adding a new room. Set URLs, add options to other actions. And then options store, it's our canonical place where the actions will live. With the listenables mixin, I'm adding all actions to this store at the same time. And this will allow me to use this notation, onset URL. So it just takes the name of the action and adds on and capitalizes the first character in the action. So set URL becomes onset URL, set options become onset options. And what I'm doing here with the options and URLs, I am setting those values on the store as properties, because I will need them later when I'm loading and when I'm adding options. And options, they're just rooms in this case. Okay, so on load options, I have the options and I'm saving it in the this.options property. And then I'm making a request using the URL, this.url. And I have three arguments, error, response, and body. Obviously, always check for error and make sure body is not empty. Only then I can proceed. If I have an error, I need to at least console log it. So the body would equals the body that I parse from a JSON. I don't need the string, I need the actual JavaScript object. That's why I need to parse it. A good idea would be to encapsulate JSON.parse and try catch in case you have some weird characters, but I'm using my own backend, so I know that's good. And I'm using .bind, so I don't have to mess with underscore this. The key here is to use to trigger, always trigger. That's how Reflux know when it's time for this action to be triggered. And then add option, that's how we would create a new room, a new chat room. We would submit a post request. And we would submit some JSON with the name equals option. Again, always check for errors in your callbacks when you have that object. And then we also would need to trigger this action. And shift means insert that as a first parameter versus push, because it's just an array. And again, I'm using bind. So now I need to export my component so other modules can use it. So I'm using module.exports. It's Node.js syntax. And I'm using create class That is Autocomponent class. Sorry, Autocomplete class. And I'm using mixin from the reflux. So what it will do, it will connect my data store, options store. And then in the initial state, I want to use these actions. I want to set the URL because by now I know the URL from the props, and I need to set the initial options from the props that I'll be passing to this autocomplete. You've already seen it in app.jsx. I'm passing those variables. And how they're defined, I'll show it to you later in the backend code and in the handlebars. So the state is options, filtered options, that's a smaller subset of options, and the current option, which is empty right now. Current option is also the input box value. Component will mount method will do the loading of options. What's good about this component? It works only on the browser. So that's why we're using it on the browser, and in the isomorphic React.js on the backend, we will be just hydrating those values directly. Don't need to submit a AJAX or XHR request. Filter method will get the value and set the filtered options according to that value. So basically we're narrowing down the list of options. And I'm using .filter method from the JavaScript array library. So options, it's an array. I will return only those values that match the value of e.target.value. Obviously, I don't want to compare the whole string. I'm just comparing the first one or two, or how many characters I typed. So if I type just 3 characters, I would truncate the option name to those 3 characters. And then add option. That's the method that is responsible for making a request, post request to the server. So we're using actions.addOptions, which we defined previously, and that would use request library to make the post request. And in the callback, we also want to filter the list. So after we add an option, we want to filter the list again. And finally, render method. So we start with a div container. It has a class of form-group, because it will be like a form. We'll have an input field with the type text and a class of form-control. And then option.name, that's the same class that we're using in our tests. Unchanged, we will trigger this filter. So every time there is a new character or we delete a character, we will filter. And the value would be set to current option. That's a controlled component. And I always like to have placeholders. I don't know about you. Filtered options.map. That's basically iterating through the filtered options and displaying them. Nothing fancy, just another div. Always have keys in your lists. Otherwise, React will complain. It needs it for performance. What's interesting here, again, option-list-item. Do you remember that? That's exactly the same class we used in our tests to kind of fetch the number of options. And then I'm just using this link, just there's nothing there, it will be the same page, but just something to click. Okay, then we have this if condition. So what I'm using here, I'm using ify, immediately invoke function expression. And basically I have the condition that says if there's no options that match this criteria, so filtered options is empty, and the input box is not empty. That means we entered something, but there is no matches, then offer to add a new option. So it would be option-add. And again, this is the class that we're using in tests to simulate the click. And on click, we use this.add options. We bind it, and then we invoke that function immediately. So this is just another way how you can write conditions in JSX. Just wanted to show you. I think that's pretty cool to use ify in curly braces inside of the JSON, inside of the JSX.